Hello and welcome to another LifeSafe tool video. The purpose of this video is to learn a little bit more about the LiST visualizer and try to see some ways in which this particular tool within the LifeSafe tool package can be used. So the very first thing that we need to do is to pull up our browser and go to listvisualizer.org. When we get to the opening screen, what we see is a visualization essentially of all of the interventions that are currently present in LiST and the linkages to cause-specific mortality. In some cases, you'll see that there are some risk factors that are intermediate steps between the intervention and the ultimate cause of mortality. So have noticed that some of these boxes have little circles in the top right-hand corner, and this is because this is a grouping of periconceptual interventions. So if I click on that, it opens the box up and allows me to see all of the different interventions that are inside of that periconceptual grouping. If I want to have more information on a specific intervention, I can click on it and a pop-up will pop up, and with that information available to me. So I'll have the definition of my intervention as well as the default data source within LiST. You'll remember that in LiST, if you have newer data or data that isn't available in LiST by default, you can always enter it. But this data source refers to the default data source in LiST. So if all I wanted to know was my definition and my data source, then I could click Done and this pop-up will disappear. We'll go back to the screen. But if I want to learn a little bit more about how this intervention impacts different things in terms of mortality or risk factors, I can come here and isolate it. So I can see here that folic acid supplementation or for fortification will impact neonatal mortality due to congenital anomalies, and that in turn will contribute to all-cause neonatal mortality. So that was just to see that functionality of isolation on one intervention. And if I want to return to my initial screen, I just close that out and I'm back to where I started. My periconceptual box is still open. Now you'll see that some of these arrows go directly to things like cause of maternal mortality, but as you can see here, this also contains different types of mortality. So if I click on any one of these arrows, it will cause my receiver box, so to speak, to open up and show me the specific types of mortality that are available in here. And now I can visualize directly from intervention to mortality, or here from intervention to a risk factor. If I click, so that was if I clicked on an arrow that was between either a closed box or an intervention to a closed box. But now that I've opened it up, if I click on one arrow, I get another pop-up, and this pop-up describes the linkage between my intervention and either my risk factor or my cause-specific mortality. And it'll show me the efficacy value, the affected fraction, some notes that are relevant to include here, as well as the data source for this linkage. So where did we get these data? Where did we get these values? In this case, you have this study and a link to go see the study so you can get some background information as to where that data comes from. This is true for all of the arrows that link any one direct intervention to a cause-specific mortality or an intervention that links directly to a risk factor, or even from a risk factor to a cause-specific mortality. All right, so I have a lot of things open here, and for example, this is no longer of interest to me, and I want to go back and reset, come back to my home screen and see that initial screen. Another functionality of the LiST visualizer that I can use, and that's incredibly helpful, would be to use the filter. So once I click on filter, for example, if I am an NGO who focuses on malaria, and I wanted to know what influences child mortality due to malaria, I can filter on that. And then this will be my child-specific, my malaria, child mortality due to malaria. And upstream, I can see which interventions contribute to this malaria deaths, essentially. And once again, you can see that the malaria deaths contribute to the overall all-cause child mortality. So I can, or actually, if I wanted to filter on not only malaria, but I also want to learn about pneumonia, for example, I can choose child deaths due to pneumonia and update my filter. And now you can see that these two mortalities are here. And these are, malaria was a very simple example, easy to visualize, but for pneumonia, there's quite a few interventions that are involved and quite a few risk factors also that play a role. So that was just to give you kind of a visualization of how complex it can get. Now let's say I want to go back to just my malaria, and I'm doing some malaria programming and I want to print this image out to say these are the interventions that I should focus on to reduce my malaria deaths. I can download this image. I can download as a PNG, as a JPG, or as a SVG file with either a white or transparent background. I'm not going to do that now, but if I was going to, I would then just download the image. And finally, if you want to have a little bit of background information about the LiveSafe tool as a whole, or about the LiST visualizer specifically, you can either take a look at this information here or always consult our website for up-to-date information about everything that we're doing with the LiST team. And there's the option of visiting all of this information in French, if that is your language of comfort or the language in which you're producing documents. So that was an overview of the LiST visualizer. I hope it was helpful to you. Thanks.